going to go ahead and get started. And I'd like to welcome Wake County Manager Jim Hartman and Executive Director of the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, Chris Lucasina.
Good evening. The best thing about tonight is we're having to bring in extra chairs. So I think that says something already. I'm County Manager Jim Hartman, and I'd like to welcome you to the Wake County Transit Investment Strategy Public Kickoff. I'm glad to see so many people here tonight. I'm pretty excited for this event, and know many of you are excited as well. Before we get started, I know we have many elected officials from all parts of Wake County and beyond, so I'd like you to stand up and be recognized. Elected officials, all of you. And now I'd like everybody else to stand up. Seriously. Or raise your hand. And I think all the elected officials and staff, let's give them a round of applause for showing up. The transit strategy we are kicking off tonight is going to take a slightly different approach and emphasize public outreach and public education. So it's really important that you are here and part of the process. And we want to move ahead. As we move ahead, we want to invite you to encourage others to participate. There's so many fantastic organizations that are working together on the Wake County Transit Strategy. Campo is one of them. Chris?
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, tonight we want to not only inform you, but also encourage you as members of the community to have a voice throughout the process. We thank all of you here in the room. We also want to thank those of you who are watching online at waketransit.com and RTN Channel 18 for participating in the process. And as Jim mentioned, we have several partners involved in this effort: the Wake County Transit Strategy, the City of Raleigh, the Town of Cary, Raleigh-Durham International Airport, NC State University, Triangle Transit, Wake County, the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the Research Triangle Park. Together, these agencies are dedicated to bringing the county the best transit options that we can. And tonight, you'll hear from several speakers who are going to explain different transit options and the process that we're going to use over the next several months. We hope that that's interesting, interactive, and hopefully informative for you all.
Lots of people, I'm sure including some of you, participated in a survey ahead of tonight's meeting and shared some of your questions about transit and the process that we begin tonight. We'll be answering some of those questions during a question and answer period later this evening. But we also want to gather questions during the event. If you have a question, you can tweet it to @WakeTransit, and we will try our best to get it answered. If you aren't on Twitter or prefer paper, we also have note cards available. For the folks watching who are not in the room, we want to hear from you as well. Send your questions via Twitter or email them to waketransit@wakegov.com. And we are very excited to have international public transit expert Jarrett Walker with us this evening.
I'm not Jared, of course, but Jared has 23 years of experience designing and explaining transit networks. He's worked with transit agencies, with cities, with developers and nonprofits, pretty much anyone who wants to make better use of public transit in their community. He's led numerous planning efforts in North America, Australia, and New Zealand, and is known for his work educating stakeholders about the choices that transit requires, building clear consultation processes and helping organizations form a coherent and implementable set of transit goals. He's also the author of the book Human Transit. Please give me one more warm welcome for Jared Walker.
Yes, and I'm not Jared either. So let me get this going. You can go take that if you want. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, everyone, and wonderful turnout tonight, and a real sign of how much and how many people care about transit in this county. Don't blow me up too much. I'm just the consultant. My job is basically to ask you some questions. I'll be asking you some questions over the course of several months, and I'll preview some of the questions tonight. But I want to start by emphasizing the kind of approach that my firm takes to these studies, the kind of approach that we recommend, is not an approach where you hire a bunch of smart people and they go off and write a plan for you, and then you decide whether you like it. The approach, first of all, I don't think anybody should be writing a plan for you who isn't part of your community. Our role, my role, particularly as the guy who comes in with the sort of national and international experience, is to be the guy who has been through this planning process 50, 60, 70 times in a lot of different cities, and therefore has a sense of what the predictable issues are and what you're likely to confront and what you're likely to have to deal with, and who can sort of set that up for you. But the distinctive thing about this process is that the plan is going to be yours. It is going to belong to Wake County. It's going to be the result of quite a rich consultation process in which everybody in this room will have some way of participating. What's more, at numerous points through this process, we are going to ask you hard questions. And I'm going to ask you a couple tonight, and then as we go through the study, there will be a few more. For example, there will come a point in this study where there will be 2 maps of the plan. They will be very, very different. And we are not going to tell you which one we like, because we're not going to like one of them or another. That's not going to be my job. They're going to be their purpose is going to be to illustrate to the community what dramatically different options you have, how many different paths you could take, but in a way that highlights also what the real trade-offs are that you have to think about. So it may seem at first that the first question is really the easy and obvious one. And this is, of course, a fundamental value judgment. We're talking about paying some more taxes in return for a better transit system, and people are going to decide for themselves ultimately whether it's worth that to them. This is the first part of my presentation where I can be mistaken for a salesman, because I'm going to talk a little bit about why this conversation is happening in so many cities right now, and why transit is suddenly hot in a way that it hasn't seemed before in a lot of different cities across the country. So forgive me if I sound like an advocate for this a little bit. Obviously, I've spent 23 years in public transit. I kind of like it. So feel free to discount my views as that of somebody who's pitching for his own profession. But some interesting things are happening in the world. Everything we thought we knew about urban transportation 10 years ago has come into question. Because from basically my childhood until 2004, one of the things we were all sure about was that the overall quantity of driving in the country was going up and was going to keep going up, and that looked like something we could take to the bank and something we could all count on. And then in around 2004 to 2006, the line stopped and flatlined, and it has been basically flatlined ever since. I could also show you charts from the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the countries I follow closely, and they all look like this. Across the developed world, driving stopped growing about a decade ago. Now, you can have lots of different feelings about this, but this is a fact. Now, there are a whole lot of different explanations for this, but one is certainly the return of the city and the new interest in urban lifestyles and urbanization. I want to say right away, this is a very important point. When I talk about the virtue of urban lifestyles, I am not telling you that you personally should want one. What I am saying is that the market seems to be telling us that people want this. If San Francisco were such a terrible place, it would not be so monstrously expensive to live there. That is the free market telling us that places like that have something that a lot of people want right now. What's changing? It's not just that VMT has gone flat, it's that the age of the first driver's license continues to rise. I encourage you to notice this statistic because it's a statistic that distinguishes the millennial generation from their parents at the same age. And one of the commonest ways to misunderstand the millennial generation on the part of older people like me is to assume that our young adult children are basically ourselves at that age, and that yes, we like those things at that age, and when they're older, they'll like what we like. That's probably true to a great extent. This morning I had breakfast with a group of millennials and we had a great conversation, and I asked them about the ways in which they think they're different from their parents and the way that they think their generation is unique. And they couldn't name the reasons that I think their generation is unique. They told me mostly about ways that every young generation thinks they're different from their parents. You know, we feel more open-minded, we're more flexible, you know, all those kinds of things that are just mostly about being, I think, about being young. But what's interesting about the millennial generation is this enormous demand for a particular kind of place, and a demand that they're sort of leading but are not the sole source of. People, all generations, are to some extent taking a greater interest in multimodal cities, advocating, you know, valuing things like diversity, proximity, opportunity, serendipity, the sense that cities are places where things are more likely to surprise you, and some people like being surprised, and sustainability. And of course, there's also the economic dimension that losing the car is the key to affordability. There are a bunch of emerging reasons now for more people to try transit, and there's some emerging information we're getting right now that's changing the calculus about transit. And let me start first with the reality. There is this desire to live in denser, more walkable places. There is the question of affordability around car dependence. People are experiencing the car as a burden, the car ownership. People in certain economic circumstances do not associate their car necessarily with liberty, or at least the liberty that it provides them is also an enormous economic burden. Safety. Safety and value of travel time. We are getting more and more information telling us that really, really, really safe driving is really boring. And that most of the things we do to entertain ourselves while we are driving our cars, we probably shouldn't be doing. It was a very interesting event. I don't know if you've heard about it. In the United Arab Emirates, which is a country I've been in, your results will differ because we don't drive nearly as bad as they do. It's a country of really very frightening roads, but nevertheless, their major smartphone carrier went down for 3 days. Everybody's phone went dark. Traffic accidents dropped by 40% in those 3 days. So there's something going on there, which is think about how this, everybody's little umbilical cord now, is changing the value of travel time. When I was a kid, time you spent driving was basically lost time. You could listen to the radio, but that was about all you were going to do. Now, I could be working. And the reason I take the bus, even though it often takes, you know, twice or more as long as driving would take, is that I am busy. And I could get a bunch of things done on this bus that I can't get done if I am staring at this boring pavement and at the car in front of me when I have more important things I could be doing, and lots of us are in that experience. And remember, this thing about the millennial generation, the distinctive thing about their generation is that they don't know what it is like to not have always had that. So they are attuned to that, attuned to these possibilities in a way that, you know, we old folks who are learning this later are never going to be. So that's going into this calculation about what is a good use of time anymore, and it's why transit doesn't have to be faster than driving anymore. Then there are a bunch of reasons, that's reasons for people to try transit. Then there are emerging reasons for urban areas to try transit. And they have to do fundamentally with breaking through the way that congestion will otherwise cap your economic growth. Now, lots of people want to have an argument about whether transit will reduce congestion. Will there be fewer cars in front of me on the freeway if we build this transit line? That is actually a complicated argument to make, and I think the real argument is more interesting. The real argument is that when your freeways get congested, it will become a barrier to development and a barrier to further economic growth. Transit is a very effective way of creating vast amounts of capacity that bypass that barrier and allow growth to continue. And that is why great cities that have established transit systems are now able to take such extraordinary amounts of growth, such extraordinary amounts of stuff being built in places like Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., because they have the transit systems. Congestion, my conservative friends will run numbers that say, but congestion is terrible in Washington, D.C. Yes, but congestion affects not very many people, really, because so much of the city is on the transit system. Transit is associated with attracting the talent that is attracted to dense cities. Google, Facebook, Electronic Arts, Apple, all these companies that located in a place that looks very much like RTP now face the problem that their employees don't want to live anywhere near there. They want to live in an old, dense, historic city. And so these employers, because they actually compete aggressively with each other for this talent, have to run these very expensive express buses all the way to that city, which in that case is 30 miles away. So the ability to attract that talent, the ability to be a place where that talent wants to be. You don't have to compete with San Francisco because there are a bunch of different price points, right? There are lots of people want this at various price points. You don't have to be that expensive. But fundamentally, that's driving so much of the information economy of the 21st century. And finally, very importantly, we're hearing a lot, we're talking a lot now in our societies about income inequality. Not everyone is comfortable with that term, but I think we can all talk about income immobility, the danger of being trapped at a particular income level with no credible way of improving yourself. This is the basic question of, if the society is built on the image of a ladder of opportunity, that ladder has to be visible from the bottom. People at the bottom of the ladder have to see the ladder and believe that they can grasp onto the ladder and climb it. If the ladder looks like a wall, you have a very different kind of social problem in the society. Transit, physical mobility, turns out to be a very important part of income mobility. It turns out to be a very important part of giving people basic access to jobs that enable them to start moving forward. It very much correlates often with the reduced dependence on public welfare and so on, which actually is a way that you ultimately save tax dollars indirectly. And finally, of course, vehicle trip reduction with all of its environmental and emissions benefits. But don't cars equal liberty? Most of us have had the sensation of getting in the car, especially in a rural setting, and heading out on the open road and feeling just fundamentally and wonderfully free. And that's absolutely valid and okay, and I felt that too. But whether cars equal liberty actually depends on where you are and who you are. There are places where it doesn't. You know, I've had plenty of experiences when I've been in the big cities like New York or San Francisco or Philadelphia, and you come out on the street and there's a man in traffic sitting in his car, stuck in traffic, and he's glaring at screaming at his cell phone, and he can't do anything because the traffic isn't moving, and yet there's a subway going past him underneath, there are pedestrians going past him faster, there are cyclists dodging around him faster. His car has become his prison in that situation. And although I don't think you can expect that to happen here, the reality will be that as in dense places, parking naturally becomes more expensive. I don't care what your parking policies are, you will pay in time or you will pay in money. If the parking price is free, you will spend a lot of time driving around the block looking for a space. You know, either that or the parking price will be high. That's how supply and demand work. And then the limitation on liberty that relies on car ownership. We also have to observe not everyone likes driving, and not everyone should be driving. You've heard that statistic, 90% of Americans tell pollsters that they are above average drivers. Most of us can't really be trusted with this, but at some point we're going to encounter limitations, whether we encounter the limitations that, for example, our elderly relatives experience when they want to be in place, they want to be in their homes, but they suddenly are in a place where they don't have a car. Or just the experiences of some of us, families that have been deeply touched or traumatized by a car accident have a very different experience of driving. I have that experience. You become immediately aware every time you get behind the wheel that you are about to do something incredibly dangerous. And if you're not able to forget that in the way that most of us routinely do in our daily lives, it affects you in a different way. Lots of people want those alternatives. So pulling that together, transit's benefits are often easily described in terms of what we bureaucrats and lots of great do-gooder people doing good things out in the world like to call the triple bottom line. You may have heard the term people, planet, profits, or something like that. The idea is that there is a range of economic benefits that arise from transit, and they have to do with things like economic mobility and attracting knowledge economy workers. And also, I would mention, allowing your city to grow beyond where congestion would cap it. There are social benefits, the benefits of including people who would otherwise be cut off. There are environmental benefits. But I always get a little uncomfortable when my friends in the far left bubble talk about these three things as the only things we should care about, because my friends a little further, my friends who are outside of that bubble often say, but you know what? All three of those things sound like the result of a managed and manipulated society, and I just don't like the feel of that. So I think we have to acknowledge that for all of us, there's something more than the triple bottom line, and that is our individual sensation of liberty, our individual sensation of getting up in the morning and feeling like we have possibilities, and that is an important thing that a transit system confers in an urban area for a large number of people. Ultimately, it's about greater individual choice, and when we're talking about choice, we should be clear that we're talking about liberty. Some common mistakes about transit. I just want to throw out a couple of cautions, like the problems I have most commonly run into in the assumptions people bring to this. One of the very common assumptions, and I tend to hear this from people who are in building professions, from people who have built freeways or who have built buildings, is that transit is something we are going to build. The way that roads and buildings work is that most of the cost lies in creating them rather than in their operations. Transit is completely different. Transit's cost is mostly in operating, and as a result, everything that is built has to be operable. And I have seen my share of inoperable transit infrastructure. So this is a common caution for those of us who are thinking in infrastructure terms, who are thinking about wanting to build something. Actually, an enormous amount of good gets done in this country by low infrastructure forms of transit, like just really, really good bus systems. There are great things that you can build, but they have to make sense as operations, and not everything necessarily has to be built. Secondly, that it's about speed. I think this is a confusion that arises when people are themselves motorists, and when in your car you care about speed. But in transit, we care about a couple of other things, and overwhelmingly in transit, especially in urban transit, frequency is more important than speed. I have seen over and over proposals for for a service that will be very fast once it comes, but that's not going to come very often. And that's not really matching the reality of most people's lives, which is that I need to go now. And frequency is the degree to which transit approximates the convenience of your personal vehicle in that it's ready to go now. It is the thing that actually attacks transit's greatest disadvantage, which is not really operating speed so much as it is the weight, or more broadly, the sense that it's not there when you need it. This is probably one of the most sensitive things I have to say, but I think it has to be said because it comes from many different points of view. And it's something that runs really deep in a lot of different opinions that assumptions that people bring to this. There's this notion out there that the transit universe can be divided into something called a choice rider. A choice rider is a person who had a car in the driveway and could have used it. And then there's something called a dependent rider. And a dependent rider is someone who is assumed they have to use transit no matter how bad it is. We have this image that tends to push us to extremes of assuming, okay, are we talking about choice riders or are we talking about dependent riders? And the answer, of course, is that like so many things that seem like two opposites, there's actually a spectrum and almost everybody is somewhere in the middle. We are all in different situations that give us different ranges of choices and different ranges of preferences. And so whenever somebody starts talking about we need to attract choice riders, you need to caution that if this is somebody with a 7-figure salary and 3 BMWs saying that transit should be attractive to them personally, well, there aren't very many people in that position. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And this is the danger of polarization generally, that the ends are more exciting than the middle, but most people are in the middle. And what that means for transit is that it's a spectrum, and that means, too, incremental improvements in transit gain incremental ridership benefits. They always do. And if we were waiting around to make a big if the story of transit was there's really no point in caring about it until we can make a big gesture that will attract the choice rider, well, that's not how transit actually works. How transit actually works is that incremental improvement generates incremental ridership benefit, and you can go a long way through incremental improvements. I'm not saying there aren't great things that you can achieve with big things like a big piece of infrastructure, but it's not the only way to grow the relevance of transit in fundamentally transformative ways. So I'm going to ask you a big, hard question now, and I'm going to take some time to explain it. But I first want to offer you a metaphor, which for my role in the person who asked this question, and it's like plumbing. Say you hire someone to, say you hire a plumber to fix your sink, and he goes in under your sink, and he messes around a little bit, and he finally beckons you over, and he says, now look, I could just glue this together like this and wrap some tape around that, and it'd cost you $50 and be good for another year. Or I could rip out the whole assembly and replace it like this, and it'd be just like new, but it'd take a week for the part to get here. Cost you about $1,000. And you need to make a decision. And you, the customer, have to make that decision. And both is not an acceptable answer. It is amazing how often when I ask groups of citizens whether they prefer this or that, they tell me both. And I want to be like that contractor or plumber just standing there just looking at them until they give me an answer to my actual question. Because here's the point. This project is entirely about your values as a community, not mine. But I, as the plumber, get to frame the question. Because only if you answer the question that I, as a transit planner, need to have answered, can I implement your direction so that your direction has some impact on reality. So think of us in the business as like plumbers or contractors. And sometimes when the plumber is standing there, the customer goes off and says, well, I've been really thinking I want the whole thing to feel more open, and I want it kind of Baroque. And the plumber or contractor just kind of stands there, and the speech goes on. And well, I experienced that too. People get together and fashion mission statements about sustainability and equity and justice and prosperity, and I just wait for them to come back around and answer the question, because you have to answer my question, because this is the real question that transit presents us with. And it's a question that arises in a particular way because of the mathematical nature of what transit is. And the question is, I think both these mics are live. The question is, how do we balance a set of goals that we associate with ridership with a set of goals that we associate with what I'm going to call coverage? So this takes a bit of explaining, but it's fundamental to finding our way through this. So we know in our business the recipe for ridership. If you tell us to go design a transit system for maximum ridership, we know how to do that. We know what causes it. We know that on the one hand, if we've got big, dense commuter express markets from park and rides to distant employers, bypassing congestion and ideally into a dense employment center will do pretty well. We also know that another pattern, which is much more city building, is to run frequent all-day service that's always coming all day, following patterns of density, walkability, linearity, and continuity. So this is how the transit planner or transit agency thinks when you tell him that you want a high ridership network. What you're telling him is that you want him to think about transit as though it were a business. And what a business does is choose which markets it will enter. Businesses flatter us customers into thinking that we're choosing them, but before that happened, they chose us. They chose to be available to us. And how does a transit business think about that? Well, they learn to recognize patterns in a city that indicate high ridership. And they also then reward those patterns with frequency. Frequency really matters. We keep a huge database of individual routes in about 25 cities across the US, mostly around your size class, and we keep plotting them. The x-axis is midday frequency, the y-axis is productivity, which is ridership per unit cost, bang, $4. And you see that even though frequency is expensive, as the frequencies get higher and higher, which is to say a lower and lower number, like every 15 minutes or every 10 minutes, the productivity goes up. High frequency is a very expensive investment, and yet it really pays off if it's in the right place. That's why a lot of transit systems now are developing brands that really not only present their frequent network, but actually really advertise it. We want people to see that part of the transit network where service is always coming. The wait is over, the network for people in a hurry, my own contribution to the discourse, the slogan, frequency is freedom. So how is Raleigh doing on frequency? How's Wake County doing on frequency? This little map is in colors that I'll just briefly introduce because all of our maps will be in this color scheme. Red means service every 15 minutes or better all day. That generally means a bus is always coming soon. Blue, there's not very much blue on the map, there's a bit in the south, means service every 30 minutes all day. Green means service every 60 minutes all day, and the orange lines are generally peak only. They only run during commute periods. And what we can see is that what we have right now in Wake County is a terrifically frequent internal circulation system in NC State. We have a line out New Bern, and we have a line out Capitol Boulevard, and that is it. So huge amounts of the city, even relatively potentially high ridership parts of the city, now getting a bus once an hour all day, do not begin to determine your transit potential based on your existing ridership when you were only running one bus an hour. That is not a frequency that many people are going to find liberating. So just to apply a little bit of peer pressure, here's Columbus, Ohio, rather similar city in terms of size and mix. They are also a capital and university town. Big grid of red lines all over that map that will be put in when they complete the plan we did for them. Little old Salem, Oregon, a freestanding town of only 100,000, our state capital in Oregon, no major university. Even there you see quite a complete network of red lines. But I want to come back on the next part. So frequency is important, but the other part is that if you tell us that you want ridership, we have to respond with service to a particular kind of built environment. And those features are these four. Density. Think about it. We've got a bus stop or a transit stop, doesn't matter what the mode is. There's a certain area around that where it's going to be easy to get to that transit stop. How much stuff is going on in that area? That's what the word density means. And I'm sorry if some people have emotional responses to the word density, but that's the actual meaning of the word, the amount of stuff in a fixed area. So we have to care about that. And if there's twice as much stuff, we're going to have twice as much ridership potential for the same cost. Obviously, we gravitate toward density. How are you doing on population density? There's actually quite a bit of it. The pattern of population density in Wake County is kind of scattered, but there is, of course, that huge east-west band that incorporates most of the south half of the city of Raleigh, the old part of the city of Raleigh, and extends well on west in patches into Cary. There's a somewhat separate and more difficult to serve suburban area with some high densities in the north. We've left Durham and Orange on that map just for a little bit of peer pressure to convey that, for better or worse, your densities are comparable to what Durham and Orange have. The patterns are a little different, the challenges are a little different, but it's not unreasonable that you would have at least that level of transit demand. But it's not just density. It's not just, are there people within a quarter mile of the stop? Can they walk to the stop? Well, that's about the local street network. And this is why, all other things being equal, you will always get better ridership out of the downtown Raleigh grid or out of other fine grid networks than you will in a network of loop-to-loop streets, because it affects how much that circle is the quarter-mile circle around a transit stop in the center. The black lines are how much of that circle can actually walk to the stop in that distance. And obviously, where you have a grid, most of the circle can walk to the stop. If you don't have a grid network, if you have a more fragmented street network, you may be near people, but they may not be able to reach you. The other crucial part of this is, can you cross the street at the stop because most transit will take you from this side of the street in the morning, return you to that side of the street in the evening. You will have to cross the street once per day to make a round trip. Pedestrian crossings are crucial. Linearity. Parts of your region consist of lots of destinations strung out along a line that's very easy for transit to follow so that we connect any two of those destinations. Glenwood is a nice example of a pretty nice linear street with lots of interesting destinations all along it, all the way out to Crabtree. After I drove down Glenwood, I drove down Edwards Mill, and I saw a street that has about as much density, but a lot of it seemed to be hidden way back in the trees on the end of long roadways. I finally got to the NC State Biomedical Campus, which is way off a roadway down there. You've built it, we have to work with it, but all other things being equal, that is a less promising landscape for a high ridership transit system because walking out to the line is so much more difficult. This puts us in the awkward position of either going straight down the street and making people walk a long distance or having to deviate into these places which nobody will have the patience to ride through. It forces on us a no-win choice between serving these destinations and running straight. Finally, continuity. All other things being equal, if we have to cover a longer distance to get to you, that is a lower bang for buck for us than if you were closer in. And nothing against Zebulon or Fuquay-Varina that are in that situation in this county, but that is part of the math of transit. So all I've said there is that there's a big if around everything I've just said. I've not said that any of those places are better than another. I've not said that I like them more. What I've said is if you tell me you want a high ridership network, those are the places I will focus on. Only if you tell me that. So if I'm pursuing a ridership goal, what I will tend to do is take the available budget, concentrate it on relatively few streets because that's what enables me to run really high frequency, is that I don't try to go too many places. I focus where I can run really high frequency. I run a network of just that. And that tends to be the high ridership solution. If you in this region decided that you wanted your transit system built based solely on ridership, you might not have any service outside of Raleigh and Cary, except maybe a couple buses on the peak. If we go other places, it's for other reasons. Large parts of those cities, of course, wouldn't have service either. Well, we have this, obviously, this competing goal for transit, and it's what I call a coverage goal. And the slogan that makes us care about this tends to be something like access for all. We want everyone to be included. We want to be inclusive. We want to be equitable. We want, for example, for every part of the county to feel they have a stake. And of course, we want to, many of us want to respond compassionately to extremely severe needs. The person who simply would not have a life if they didn't have some kind of transit mobility, even if they are located on a mobile home, on an acre, out beyond Zebulon somewhere where it's expensive to serve them. We feel a compassionate desire to do that. Everything that we do we do intentionally with the knowledge that ridership is not that high ridership is not the outcome. High ridership from a countywide perspective, by a countywide standard, is what we call coverage service. And what I ask is that we be conscious about the fact that I've never met anybody who really wants a 100% ridership network. Sooner or later, when you look at what you have to cut in order to get to that, it's not really acceptable to much of anyone. But the real point is not that one of these is better than the other, it's that they are different and opposite. The coverage goal is what we're pursuing when we drive around in suburban low-density areas, knowing that they don't have the physical features that I just described that make for a high ridership frequent route. It's what we get when we run into rural areas. It's what we get it tends to be what we get when we run into smaller and more remote cities. And it's certainly what we get out of very specialized services like a service just for seniors or really a service just for much of anyone. And in those cases, what we're doing is we're not planning for ridership, we're planning for availability. We're basically saying the service needs to be available to people. It doesn't really matter as much how heavily it's being used. Now, obviously, we report the ridership of those services too. We like to know that they're being used, but we wouldn't cut them and move the service somewhere else just because it has low ridership by countywide standards. So what I ask everyone to acknowledge is that these goals are both incredibly important and also mathematically totally opposite. They lead us to opposite kinds of network. One leads us toward a very concentrated, frequent network just in the best demand corridors. The other tells us to spread it out, give everyone a little bit. And so, you know, when someone who lives in a very low-density suburban cul-de-sac kind of area says transit should run like a business, I would say, okay, we can do that, but we're not going to go to your neighborhood. Right? We wouldn't do that if we were running like a business. If we're running to your neighborhood, we're running it to your neighborhood for a coverage reason. So again, don't let the terms that make you think in polarized terms. It's not a polarized question, it's just a spectrum. The way a spectrum works, it's not like you have to choose between the endpoints, but you do have to choose a point on the spectrum, and if you move toward one end of the spectrum, you are moving away from the other end of the spectrum. That is the fact of life that I can't protect you from. And so we will be coming back to that question in the course of the study. Now, I've talked long enough, but just to wrap up, I want to leave two more questions for you to think about. One is, how much does the plan have to benefit you personally in order for you to support it? This goes to a lot of different issues, but a lot of people assume, a lot of political calculation assumes that every voter is fundamentally selfish and is only going to vote if there's something in it for them. Is that actually true of you? Are there, for example, more indirect benefits to your community or to your economy, benefits to the economy that come back to you indirectly, that are worth voting for a transit system that doesn't go past your house when you need it? And finally, how do we balance planning for the present with planning for the future? Now, just for arbitrary terms, to some extent, as an assumption, we're going to draw pictures in this study mostly of 2025, 10 years away. That doesn't mean that nothing happens until 2025. Stuff starts happening as soon as the money starts flowing from a successful referendum. But one of the things we have is we have different ideal study years in our minds. I met this morning with some people who represent very low-income communities, and they emphasize over and over that their time horizon for the future is next week or next month or next Social Security check. They don't really think very far in the future. I've met other people who asked me shouldn't we really be talking about 2050? They want to have a visionary conversation about what kind of city they want, and that's also part of the transit conversation. But let's recognize that we have different time horizons for the future, and that's one of the things that makes this conversation interesting. So I'm just going to wrap up by repeating the 4 questions I've asked, none of which I have answers to because they're designed to evoke your values and encourage you to talk with each other. And to say thank you very much. If you're interested in learning more about where I come from on this, I wrote a book called Human Transit, which is a very friendly and readable thing. If you Google Human Transit Introduction, you'll find the introduction online. Thanks very much. I'm going to pass it back to Richard.
Thank you, Jarrett. My name is Richard Adams, and I'm with Kimley Horn. We are partnered with Jarrett on this project. And I am here in the Raleigh market. We are a national firm, but we are the local consultant on this team. I did want to point out, for those of you who know my children, please make note that I was the one who fixed the technology, because that never happens. And I just have a few items to cover real quickly, more from a local perspective, and then we will open the floor to questions. And speaking of questions, the first 2 of the 4 questions that Jarrett just shared with us, if you don't know already, those are posted on the board up there about general funding levels and also about the ridership versus coverage. We want your input on that. A lot of you did that before the meeting. You can do that after the meeting, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing the results of that. So, real quickly about Wake County. A lot of you know all this already. I'll go very quickly, just a little bit about, why are we here? Why are we talking about transit? Why are we looking to the future? Wake County, no surprise to most of you, as we continue to get awards for great places to live, work, and just be. More people, more jobs, interestingly, more residents under 18 and over 65. I'll touch on that in a moment, and a wide range of income levels. And then after I go through this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. More people, no surprise, tremendous population growth here in Wake County. We are now the 46th largest county in America by population. That's grown tremendously, both in absolute numbers and in our place in that ranking. Many of you know we are over 1 million people as of August of this year. and certainly more jobs. You'll see a little dip in the recession there, no surprise there, but in absolute job numbers, we are well beyond where we were before the recession. This is interesting, and this is not a trend unique to Wake County. We have more population under 18 and over 65. That number, that percent is growing, and that is predominantly on the older end of that spectrum. And what some people call that is the age dependency ratio. Those two age groups, below 18, over 65, certainly not everybody by any means, but those age groups have a larger proportion that are dependent on others for housing, for food, and for transportation, among other things. So that's something that informs us also as we look to the future. Obviously, that trend will continue, and so that also calls to the need for talking about transit. And then there's a broad income distribution here in Wake County, and we're going to certainly address all these income levels, but certainly a very broad income distribution in Wake County. So just a little bit about the county. So where do we go from here? This is a little about the project. This is a working schedule, but it gives you an idea of where we're headed. I'm going to jump to the other mic. And basically, here we are in December. We are at the kickoff, of course. This is just the beginning. I think that's obvious to most of you, but we have no answers. We have no alternatives yet. We're just beginning this process and looking forward to really getting into it later this year and mostly next year. As we move into the winter time, the bottom line are the processes. The top line in blue are the deliverables. We have a document coming out called Transit Choices. It's going to touch on a lot of things that Jared has talked to us about. It's going to touch a lot on both on Wake County, on the facts of Wake County, a lot more than I just talked about. It's going to talk a lot about the facts of transit. Some of what you heard tonight, but in more detail about the facts of transit. And we're going to have stakeholder meetings that will follow the release of that document. We also have an advisory committee that I'm going to touch on more in a minute. That advisory committee is starting tomorrow. It's a very broad group. I'll talk more in a second. The stars on here are when that advisory committee will get together at a minimum. And so in the January timeframe, we released the Transit Choices document. We have another advisory committee meeting at that time. And then we have a broad public outreach process. We get the advisory committee back together. We develop and Jared touched on this earlier, we develop network alternatives, okay? And those are going to be distinctly different alternatives for the public to consider. And so you will, of course, the public will see that. There'll be public outreach about that. That will be in the spring. And so look forward to that. And there will be obviously more public discourse after that about the choices. And it's not going to be a binary question of one alternative versus the other. There will be trade-offs in between those. And the likely final outcome here will be some blend of those two. But again, they will be distinctly different, as Jared said. And then with the schedule right now, we're looking at summer as to when, again, the advisory committee likely would get together again. We would come back, listen to what the public has said, listen to what the advisory committee has brought to us, and develop a network plan based on that. A little more about the advisory committee. It's 72 people as of right now, and we have lots, I'm certainly not going to go through all this, but we have lots of different groups represented, and you can see every municipality in the county is represented, lots of different agencies, lots of different population groups. So we're certainly trying to be inclusive, and we're real excited to engage with that group tomorrow. And we're going to challenge them, just like we're challenged the public at large, to think about the trade-offs and really come up with a plan that is that speaks to the whole county. So at this point, we are going to move to question and answers. All of you have been given index cards. I know some of you have turned that in. Certainly feel free to do that now. Just hold them up and we'll collect them. Teresa over here is ready to do that, and we have lots of other folks as well. You can do it, those of you technology savvy, we have email, we have Twitter, and we really look forward to getting going on that, and we already have some that we have received. Okay, great. So, we have some that we received through the survey that came out on the website in advance, and we're seeing more now, so we're looking forward to that. So, first question, can we expect all areas of the county to get transit service? So I will start that, and Jarrett will we'll share that as well. Certainly that really touches on what we just talked about. That is clearly talking about the coverage goal. So Jarrett, do you want to delve into that a little more?
I think that really answers itself. To the extent that you want that, you want us to devote a certain amount of the study of the plan's resources to coverage, to making sure that it's spread out a little bit everywhere. That is a choice that will be made. It is going to be in tension with the ridership goal.
Why should I support transit if I have a car? And
I think we've answered some
yes,
of these.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
So
why don't we?
We'll keep moving. Will this plan support light rail or buses or both? So I'm going to talk modes here. So.
There's a reason I haven't used those words, used the word light rail tonight until now. The point of the plan is to talk about transit and to talk about a transit network and the benefits that arise from people being able to get places easily. We will inevitably get to a conversation about the specific rail proposals that were put before you by the last Wake County Transit Plan in 2011, which include a segment of commuter rail from Garner through Raleigh toward Durham, where we'd be talking, of course, about Wake County's piece of that. And also about a proposed light rail line from Cary through downtown Raleigh and out to the northeast. We want to have those conversations in the context of first having a conversation about what you all want out of transit and what are the values that are important to you. And so that's why we're starting there. We will certainly get to that question.
And I'm going to use that to segue to the next question. I mixed up the order a little bit. Will Durham be involved in this effort? I'll start on that a little bit. We certainly reached out to our neighbors, our neighboring counties as part of this effort. Triangle Transit is a key partner in this effort, which obviously Triangle Transit represents the whole region. And so and as we all know, commuting patterns, travel patterns do not recognize boundaries, certainly don't recognize county lines. So we're going to be informed by all of our neighbors, including, of course, Durham. So, will transit options save time for commuters? And I guess that depends on which commuters you are and where you are.
That's always the answer, yes. It depends on which commuters, where they're going, and it depends on, to the extent that you want a more ridership-oriented transit system, the transit system will be focused on places where there is lots of ridership potential that may or may not be your particular commute. So it depends.
All right, this is one that we saw a lot in the advanced questions on the through the website. There were several versions of this, and certainly we see it again here. Will there be a link to the airport, to RDU? This comes up a lot. We've had conversations today with various stakeholders groups about this. Again, I'm going to put to my partner Jarrett because he's experienced a lot of different airport situations across the country and around the world. So.
The answer to almost all of these questions, of course, is that it's up to you all. And it's up to what comes out of this process. I do have a specific caution about airport services. They are very, very, very popular politically because lots of people can imagine using them very occasionally. And for that reason, they tend not to generate as much ridership as their political popularity might indicate. That's the caution about airport services. That doesn't mean they're good or bad, doesn't mean you should or shouldn't have one. That's the only technical caution about them. Because so many people can imagine using them occasionally, they tend to be more politically popular than their actual ridership outcome indicates. It turns out that a lot of the ridership that actually supports a strong airport rail link, or not a rail link, I'm sorry, any sort of airport link, is employees. And it has to be because they are the people, of course, who go to the airport all the time.
Yes. And sometimes we call that the luggage factor. So.
Right. There are a few other tragics like me who go to the airport all the time, but that's not really it.
All right. This is something also that came up a number of times in our input from the website in advance of the meeting. We saw several people ask about bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, about bicycle pedestrian factors. Jared touched on a little bit. Certainly the pedestrian and the bicycle connectivity is a critical part of this. I do want to caution about what we're going to focus on in this study is certainly related more to the transit side, but it's a critical piece, both pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, as part of this plan. So, what are the economic costs and benefits to Wake County for implementing transit? Wow, that's a big one. So there's tremendous economic opportunity, as Jared talked about, that had been realized in other parts of the country. So that's very hard to
I think
right
we've
here.
covered this in general terms. I think
Right.
the economic cost is of the problem with these sorts of things. The economic cost is extremely tangible. We are talking about an increment of some sort of revenue source that's going to come out of somebody's pocket. The benefits, as I've described, one of the great challenges with transit is that its benefits are so diverse. It has economic benefits, it has social inclusion, social benefits, it has environmental benefits, it has benefits to people's sensation of liberty. So my one caution to the questioner is don't assume that there's only one kind of benefit. Don't assume that it's only economic, because actually, often you can challenge transit on one of these points at a time, but the remarkable thing is how it delivers across the board in so many different ways.
And that somewhat answers this question: how will we fund the improvements in this plan? This plan is certainly timed and intended to help answer the question of whether or not Wake County will add a half-cent sales tax for transit. Wake County does have the ability to do that. That would obviously need to come from the community, come from the municipalities, come from the Board of Commissioners, and ultimately, of course, come from the voters of Wake County. So that is the factor, one of the primary resource factors we'll be talking about as far as what might fund this system. So, how will this plan address things like bus stop conditions and other amenities, on-street amenities? Again, I'm going to caution those are very, very important things. We will not be drilling down into the details of whether your bus stop, your transit stop, will or will not have a bench, trash can, shelter, but we will talk about certain levels of premium transit and the types of amenities that they might have associated with that type of transit.
This would probably be a good time to mention the idea of altitude. So plans have different altitudes, and altitude means what you think if you've ever looked down from an airplane or looked at Google Earth, which is that you can either see a whole big area in not very much detail, or you can see a small area in a lot of detail. This is an important but detailed area. It tends to be sort of stop by stop, segment by segment. What this plan is going to be specific about are major pieces of infrastructure like any sort of rapid transit or fixed guideway service, the alignments of major commuter services that connect communities across long distances across the counties, the specific alignments of the frequent network, what I talked about, those red lines, the places where just good local bus service is going to always be coming soon. Below that level, the plan becomes more general. We are not going to precisely redesign every bus network, every bus route in the county according to how it would look under the plan. Below the level of the frequent network, when we're talking about less frequent services, demand responsive services, all those times, there are going to be some line items and a general sense of where those would cover, but we won't necessarily get down to that level of detail. Please keep in mind that the way things actually happen is that it's like landing a plane, right? We've got to look at things at high altitude. You've got to be at high altitude in order to get there. And then as you implement, it's a process of stepping down to lower altitudes where we start talking about things like individual bus stops. And finally, when service goes on the street, it's kind of like when you land. We have this problem in planning of also what's called the sudden abrupt loss of altitude, which is when we can't focus on the county-wide issues like the issues we're raising tonight because there's somebody who only wants to talk about their bus stop. That happens too, and that's one of the things that we're going to ask you to help us with as we have this conversation, is to be conscious that we're at a particular intentional altitude here, which is the altitude we need to be at to see the needs of the entire county, and we will get to lower altitudes as you go through the implementation of the plan.
Okay, this is an interesting one. People don't shoot the messenger. People don't want to ride buses. How will this plan change that? So I think, first of all, I would say we want to challenge that notion in the first sentence. People are riding buses. They're riding buses here. This plan is not going to change people's perception of this service or that in terms of what they want to do. We are going to talk about the types of things, frequency, other quality of service that can be applied that might increase, that we know will increase ridership if done in the right way in the right place.
I really do have to attack the assumption there. Generally, if people are not riding buses, it's because the bus service isn't very useful yet to them in their situation. Please keep in mind that if people are making a rational decision not to use the bus system, we don't need to make cultural generalizations about them to explain them. We don't need to say that those kinds of people don't ride buses if it's just rational for them not to ride buses, okay? So what we actually see as we improve bus systems incrementally is that ridership grows as the buses become more useful. And ultimately, it reaches a point where all kinds of people are on the buses, as you've seen if you've ever ridden buses in a much bigger and denser city. So I simply don't think that problem, I don't think that's a useful way of presenting the problem. It's not a way of presenting the problem that's really consistent with the data.
Another altitude question: how will this plan address ADA and paratransit services? Very, very important services here in Wake County, and there's different levels that they're provided at. So we're not, obviously, there are detailed plans that are done and have been done for that type of service, and so we're not going to be planning the exact methods and processes for providing those services in this county. But it's certain that what comes out of this plan has an opportunity to impact how that's provided. So
under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the cost of a new fixed route service into a new area that we don't serve now, if it is frequent, can generate a federal requirement for what's called complementary paratransit, which is that there has to be demand responsive service in the same area for people who can't afford to, for people who can't use fixed route services for reasons of disability. We will track that cost as a valid part of the plan if we when proposing those kinds of services. I've got to be honest, this is sometimes a reason why those services don't get proposed, because although the service itself may be affordable, it may require us to extend paratransit over a large rural area, and that cost comes along with it under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's a thing that has to be thought about.
Okay, here's one from someone interested in the NC State community. How will Wolfline be integrated into this planning process? And there's some follow-up questions, but I'll start with that. NC State University and their transportation department, which administers and provides Wolfline, is a part of what we're calling the transit core team. They're at the table and have been great partners already in this process. And as you can see from the mapping that Jarrett showed you, they are already providing their own high-frequency network that is doing quite well in terms of ridership. One of their biggest issues is overcrowded buses, and that's not an issue we have across the region. So they're critical partners and have been key. And as Jarrett said earlier, universities are key to this process, not just NC State. All right, bear with me. What amount of street network improvements will be integrated into the plans? How much city/DOT support is there? So we're certainly not planning new street networks as part of this. The process will certainly respond to the street networks. There are limitations on what can and can't be done based on the street network, and certainly looking at the rail network as well. This is not focused on buses, it's not focused on rail, it's focused on transit as a whole. Sorry, I'm dealing with lots of handwriting, so bear with me. Sorry, I cannot read that one.
Go to the next one.
Do you expect taxpayers to subsidize riders? If so, how much? Is Salem really the capital of Oregon? That's on the same card, so.
Wikipedia, it's on your phones.
That's right. And the taxpayer question, again, that's what the community has to answer. There is certainly, as I said before, the sales tax is a question that the community has to answer. Can we expect all right, I think I have already answered that one. And all right, so let me get to the new ones. What will the impact of driverless cars be?
I can take that one.
All right. Have at it, Jarrett.
They will still be cars. When you get to a community of a certain density, there will still not be room for everyone to be in a separate vehicle if you want a kind of vibrant community. There is also one other important caution about driverless cars. Despite all you have heard from them, they have not actually been invented yet in the sense of being anywhere near being ready to be something you'll see on your street. I do think that they're coming. I do think that there is a much longer process of social acceptance than their proponents may assume at the moment. I think that nevertheless, there will always be a role for the vehicle that carries many people at once going more or less the same direction, because that always uses scarce urban space more efficiently than even driverless cars do.
Next question. How will this transportation choice cause Wake County and North Carolina to grow? And I think Jared touched on that a little bit earlier in terms of at some point on certain corridors and then more across the region, congestion causes limitations on growth. And transit, premium transit, enhanced transit can really extend that growth.
Let's be clear too. I mean, let's be honest. You are a region, but you're also in competition within the region. And you now have a neighboring county that has a transit plan that they're implementing. People who are coming to the region are often going to get to choose which county to live in. So there are trade-offs that individuals are making that are going to be affected by the availability of transit. That's very important.
Will the plan be Title VI compliant?
Yes.
So that's a requirement. So.
Yes, that is a requirement. Well, mostly Title VI comes in at a lower altitude of planning than we'll be doing here. So, but obviously, we're cognizant of Title VI. Title VI, if you don't know the term, it's worth looking up a little bit on Wikipedia too. It's federal legislation that basically mandates that transit planning be done in a way that is not discriminatory in outcomes against either low-income or minority communities. I have to say, personally, as a transit planner, it would be foolish of me to do that anyway, in the interests of building either a high ridership system or an equitable system. But we do have there is a system of federal legislation that guarantees those outcomes.
Okay, next question. Is it a good idea to use transit to help limit sprawl? And so, again, I think that's a question that certainly if that's a goal of the county, that and whether or not transit is actually going to be a tool to help limit sprawl. Jared,
I think the caution I want to make out is, yes, transit is part of a package of actions that can do that. It's not the only one. Where I come from in Oregon, we have been very successful in limiting sprawl. We have built on, I think, in the last 20 years, we've built on something like 2% of our agricultural land around cities. That's not just because we have good transit systems, it's also because we have a very strong system of agricultural preservation and a whole bunch of other legal barriers to growing horizontally. I prefer to frame this differently, which is, are you going to meet the market for urban living? And I think ultimately, if people who want to live in an urban place, and I should add, at all price points, want to live in an urban place, can do so, there will be less market for horizontal growth. And I must add, there will still be plenty of low-density suburban homes for everyone who wants one. There's nothing coercive about this agenda.
The next question is about the business community. How can we get businesses on board with transit, i.e. malls, shopping centers, office parks, hospitals, et cetera? And so I'll touch on that a little bit in terms of the structure of the process. We have, as you saw in the advisory committee, we've got a lot of people involved, including business leaders, including medical leaders. And we also have at the table with what we're calling our transit core team, the clients we're answering to include the Regional Transportation Alliance, which is a business group that is working with us as part of that transit core team. So we're certainly listening to them, and they're at the table as we do this. So, and hospitals are key as well. Certainly WakeMed already is one of the key transit destinations in Raleigh, and other hospitals as well. So, should we try to link major stadiums, arenas, et cetera, to achieve familiarity and popularity? This might come to the peaking question, but certainly that's going to be something we look at. Those are obviously major trip generators. The challenge is the intense level of peaking that those things create. But that will absolutely be a factor in the discussion. Okay, what are the top 3 benefits, in your opinion, of improved transit for the working class? I think we've talked a lot about that already.
I mean, that's about this pretty well.
How does this plan work with the governor's recent transportation plan? I don't think that the one that was just the latest, spot prioritization addresses Wake County Transit. They did have funding for the Durham Orange Light Rail. So the state has stepped up with some funding for that. So that certainly could speak to the future for Wake County. I do want to be a good steward of your time, of everybody here. We have a lot of people here. We've got great input. We really need to wrap up. We'll be here a little longer. The website, the Twitter, the email are all open for more input. We really appreciate that. And with that, I am going to wrap up and thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Have a great night.